Okay. Here's her Kelly.
All right, can you hear me?
It's a big turnout.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all for coming. I hope it'll be interesting and informative. I'm a practicing psychoanalyst, still working, 2 days here for telehealth and 2 days in the office. I have my area of expertise, and one of them at least, is dream interpretation. I taught the course at the Analytic Institute, and I've written papers on the subject. So first, let me say something about...
A little louder, please.
You got it? Better? First, let me say something about psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is the court of last resort. People go for medication, people go for counseling, people go for therapy. When that doesn't work, they go for analysis. Therapy, for example, is a repair, where analysis is an overhaul. Now, I'm going to talk first about some of the clinical examples of the use of dreams in analysis to give you an idea of how dreams reflect the state of mind. One case was a case I wrote a paper on. A woman came to see me, isolated, depressed, withdrawn, and we went through analysis. Her dreams did not appear for quite a while, and when the first dream appeared, it was vague, not really able to decipher. Gradually, it became more structured, and soon were people off in the distance. Well, people became closer as analysis went on, and when it discharged her, to make a long story short, it was a party, a lot of people in a party. So you can see the progress through the dreams of her analysis. Another case is, to give you an idea how dreams work, was a young man who was getting arguments and fights with everybody. And you ask him, is there anything wrong? Is everything okay at home? Are you angry at anybody? No, everything's fine. Then he has a dream in which an intruder comes into the house, goes into the guest room, and chops up the two people with a hatchet. Now I said, do you have a guest room? No. Do your room seem familiar? It's my parents' bedroom. Did he kill both people? No, just the one on the right. Well, who's the one on the right? Well, my father. Then it turned out his father was a workaholic, never home, spent very little time with the boy, and the anger, of course, was towards his father. Once we were able to define that, and once we were able to specify where the anger came from and deal with it, the fighting and the argument stopped. So that gives you an idea of how things progress. Another situation was a tragic one that took a long time, 4 or 5 times a week for a long time. It was about a commuter who came home to his house, and they were the fire engines. A wood frame house was on fire. He lost his wife, his mother, and 2 kids. Tragic. Another child was out with grandparents and, of course, was safe. He collapsed on the scene, woke up in the hospital with complete amnesia. Didn't know who he was, didn't know what he did, didn't know he had a family, didn't know what happened. He was completely blank. And, of course, if you couldn't simply tell him, because if you did, number one, he'd collapse, and number two, he'd probably have a breakdown. So it had to be a gradual process of retrieving the memory. Well, in the course of time, with regard to dreams, there were no dreams. And then finally, we started to get something that alluded to the tragedy. He has a dream of clouds. She says, so what? Clouds. Sure, the clouds of smoke. That was the first allusion where he alluded to what was really the tragedy of his life. And gradually, through analysis and through dreams, we were able to bring back what really happened, who he was an engineer, and his family, and finally able to see the boy, his son, who he had not seen for a very, very long time. So that gives you an idea clinically of some of the aspects of dreams that we work in analysis. Now let me give you the framework of dreams so you'll understand them. First of all, you may be amazed to know that rapid eye movement, REM studies, have demonstrated that you have 21 to 35 dreams in a week. Amazing? You may remember some, you may remember none, but the truth is, every night you have 3 to 5 dreams. One after you go to sleep, one in the middle of the night, and one before you wake up, and 1 or 2 in between. The reason for that is dreams protect sleep. The mind's perpetual motion machine never stops working. If you were to be thinking about whatever was on your mind, you'd wake up. Nature takes care of that by throwing the thoughts into the dream, scramble them in such a way that you don't know what you're dreaming. And therefore, it's just a bad dream, or it's any kind of dream, but it's a dream. Now, to understand the dream in terms of the coding of it, in terms of the disguise of it, you have to understand a number of things. First of all, time, place, and person are changed. The time of whatever was supposed to be is not what's in the dream. The place is not what's in the dream. It's another place, and it's another person, other than the person you really have in mind, or people you have in mind. Sometimes it's not even a person. It may be an animal. I'll come back to that. So that you have this disguise in the dream, and the dreams are constricted. That is to say, you may have a lamp in the dream, that's all. But that lamp was in a room where there was an incident that occurred. And when I have someone who says it's something like a lamp, I say, well, tell me about the lamp. Where is the lamp? Where do you remember it from? What is it like? So on. Until we get to the incident that occurred in that room where that lamp was. So that's where the constriction of the dreams. Also, dreams are symbolic. You have one thing representing another. There are universal symbols. For example, if you have somebody who's head of a company or president of the United States, it's a father figure. That's symbolic of a father figure. If you have a pocketbook in a dream, well, obviously it's a female symbol. If you have a tall building, it may be a phallic symbol of masculinity. So there are some universal symbols, but it's really much more unique to the individual. We say that people have a mental fingerprint, which is the style of the dream. The dream is usually, the recurring dreams are usually in a certain style. They're also in a certain context. The context very often is what the person does every day. If they're a plumber, it's about plumbing. If they're a doctor, it's about medicine. If they're a dentist, and so on. If you live at Harbor's Edge, it might be about the dining room, the points, the food, and you might all of a sudden see in the dream that a dog is run over. Well, that dirty dog might be Anthony or Jim, and that would be the representation. It, of course, wouldn't be really, and sorry, Anthony and Jim, it wouldn't really be Anthony and Jim. It just would, they would represent who you really have in mind, who you're really angry at or frustrated with, and you use the two of them to represent it. So that's the way it works. And so when I'm trying to help you, because dreams can be helpful to you. I woke up one morning and I was out of sorts, and I didn't know why. So I looked at my dream, and it was a hospital dream. So I knew immediately a friend of mine was going in for surgery. Once I knew that, I felt much better. Because two things are the hardest things for human beings: the unknown and helpless. Once you know what it is, you can deal with it more readily. So that sometimes dreams, as I say, dreams may help you. Sometimes dreams will give you a clue as to what's really on your mind and where to look. If nobody in the dream is there accidentally. If there's somebody in a dream, they may not be the right person, they may not be the person you have in mind, but they'll represent that person. So you ask yourself, what is there about this person that's unique? And if you look to see, it may remind you of the real person that you have in mind. Also, dreams, nothing in dreams is accidental. For example, if you have numbers in a dream, they're not there accidentally. A number could represent an age, a number could represent years ago, it could represent years to come, and so that number in the dream is not accidental. It's also not mystical in any kind of myth. Dreams are what you have in the back of your mind. They're not prophetic. You know, people feel they have a dream and it tells them something of the future. Not true. What happens is you have something in your mind. If somebody asked you about that something, you might say, yeah, I think that's going to happen. And that's what's in your mind. If it's in the dream, it's really in your mind to begin with. Sometimes it's conceptualized, you know what it is, and you can think of it. Sometimes it's just clues as to what's going to happen, and you dream about it, and then it happens. And coincidentally, it's not because of the dream. It's just something that was going to happen that you had some clue in your mind about. So, as I say, dreams are not mystical. Dreams are what you have in the back of your mind. Freud spoke of dreams as the royal road to the unconscious. And that's how we have to look at it. What is in the back of your mind that's going to be in the dreams? So that if you are thinking about something, or you're upset about something and so on, actually go back to your dream. And your dream may give you a clue what it is that you're upset about, what it is that you're feeling, about whom you're feeling. It really is, not about Jim or Anthony. So even if the dream is about, let's say, the dining room and the points and all that, that is what's going to be used because that's the immediate reference in your life. But it's not what it's about. It's about something else which that represents. You have to ask yourself, for example, if that represents something frustrating, what am I really frustrated about? Where's this really coming from? That's the way we look at dreams. And we ask a patient, for example, who has a dream, what does anything remind you of? Does the person remind you of somebody else? Is that number special in your life? Is it somebody, an age or whatever? What are the associations to that dream? And then you can get a better idea of what you're really thinking. So I'm not going to try to analyze any of your dreams. I'm just trying to help you get a framework so that you can actually utilize your own dreams in a way that might be helpful to you and to understand what dreams are all about. The cases that I mentioned to you are good examples of what happens clinically. I gave you a very abbreviated version. These kind of cases, the man with a tragedy, the boy who was his father, these things take a long time before you're going to really get to the nub of it and be able to work it out. So you don't think it just happens overnight. The case of the man with the tragedy with the fire, it took actually years before we were able to recapture his memory altogether. Unfortunately, he could not see the sun until he was ready. So he had a son out there he couldn't see for a couple of years. But finally, he came back to who he was, came back to the engineer, came back to his family, and was able to see the boy and able to resume his life in spite of the terrible tragedy, which of course it was. There are many other instances like this where you have the dreams will very often give you a clue as to what's really wrong. If a person comes in with a particular dream and they typically write it off, it's just a dream. Well, it's not just a dream. There's something there that you have on your mind that you're repressing or blocking out. That raises another question. People raise the question, why do some people remember dreams and some people don't? Even though there's, 21 to 35 dreams in a week, and yet you might not remember any. Well, it's a question of what kind of person you are. If you're the kind of person who likes to confront problems and try to resolve them, the chances are you're going to remember your dreams or remember more of your dreams. You're the kind of person who blocks things out, doesn't want to know, and represses it, the chances are you're not going to remember your dreams very well. So it's a style of who you are personality-wise that will reflect itself in the dreams, or whether you remember the dreams or how many of the dreams you remember. As time goes on in analysis, dreams increase, the memory of dreams increase. When the time we get to the point of discharge, the patient will say to me, which ones do you want me to tell you? I've had so many, So that's the whole idea. The whole idea is to have a person have an open mind, that they can look at whatever it is, face it, and be able to work on it and resolve it, and not have to repress it, not have to block it out, because if they do, there's going to be a price to pay. Obviously, things are blocked out and repressed and denied are underneath, and then to find a way and sabotage your life in some way or other. So facing the problem and working for a resolution is the only healthy way. I should have said from the start, I was asked to do presentations and I was declined. Then I heard a presentation that was about art that was so good that inspired me to do this. And you know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
Judith.
Yes.
And she's responsible for my being here. So for better or worse, you can blame her. Now that's the general framework. At this point, I'll leave it open for questions. Go ahead.
Can you get a microphone?
Yes.
Wait for a microphone.
Would you raise your hand?
Yeah.
Anybody have a question? Go ahead.
Wait for a microphone.
Go ahead, Herb.
Yes.
Wait a second, Herb. Yeah, Herb, go ahead.
They can't hear you though.
Can hear me.
Then I gotta repeat.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Very good. I will call you doctor. We have been led to believe, to a large extent, our dreams are influenced to a great extent on what we have been watching shortly before we went to sleep on television. So that in reality, it's not so much our own dream, but we are dreaming what we've seen on television. Now, my question, Dr. Pusar, is that really bad? And if not, is it good? And if it is good, how do we keep doing it?
The trouble is, Herbie, you watch too much television.
The
No,
answer is
the answer is the same as I said before. You will use whatever context you can to represent what you have in mind. If that program is convenient to be able to get to the point of what you have in mind, you use that TV program. But if you listen carefully, if you go over that TV program with the person, you'll find there are changes. It's not exactly the same. Little things are changed that allude to what the person is really thinking about, not just repeating what the television show was.
So a calm program in the evening before bedtime would be preferred from a wild action situation on television that you can control by picking out what you watch late at night.
Well, the question is, what does it bring up for you?
Yeah.
It's not just the program on TV. What does a program bring up for you in your life that you will use the thing? For example, let's suppose it's a shoot 'em up kind of thing, or a war, something like that.
Oh, but
The chances are you have some kind of conflict and some kind of anger with somebody with whom you'd like to have a war. And
You
that's
mean-
where the program would be used to represent that.
well, in other words, if you're watching something which can relate to
Enough for
a previous incident in life, that would bring back that dream.
Well, sure. I mean, obviously, the dream can stimulate whatever's in the back of your mind, whether it's current, whether it's past.
But in reality, it's keeping you, it's keeping you going, shall I put it that way. I don't know a technical term, but the fact that you still are using your brain.
Well, yeah, but the whole idea is to be able to get to the back of your mind, find out what's there,
Right.
and be able to confront it, resolve it, and so on. And the TV program may be just a stimulus to bring up. Now, I should remember something else. I
Well,
should
that's
remind you of
good.
something else. Dreams in one night, even though there may be 3 or 4, and they seem disparate, are all interrelated. They're really basically all on the same subject, even though they're presented in a lot of different ways. And so if you have a few dreams, look for some thread that runs through them, which is really what you're getting at. Not only is that true, but it's true in terms of the past. You can have a dream, and then it reminds you of a dream of years ago. Maybe even a dream of childhood. because there's a connection. There's something there that currently is bringing up something that was never resolved. Same is true of recurring dreams. You will have a dream that's recurring because you're trying to work something out that's on your mind that you've never resolved. Sometimes, as I say, it goes way back to childhood. It may go back to some kind of child abuse, physical, emotional, and the worst kind, I don't know if you realize, the worst kind of abuse is neglect. And that is where it may go back. And neglect is a big factor in the course of life. I had a patient, for example, whose parents were very self-centered, very narcissistic. And they really were all about themselves. They really didn't pay that much attention to the kids. And so when this boy came home with poor grades, and mother was a teacher, they said, well, that's all he can do. Well, he ended up with anxiety, inferiority, panic attacks, but he was determined to prove them wrong. He became a super student and eventually a very successful doctor. So he obviously was much brighter than the parents gave him credit for. But his dreams, nonetheless, even though he was a successful doctor, his dreams were still all about a sense of inferiority, number one. He used to use the term broken. I felt broken. And he, as a child, he didn't realize that it was his parents. He thought they were right. He was inferior. So he was constantly, even as a successful doctor, still having anxiety, social anxiety, and still having feelings of inferiority that he had to be able to work out. He would wake up in the morning, go to his office, look on the wall, and see the diploma and say, oh, that's who I am. To be able to define his identity and be able to be comfortable with who he was and what he's accomplished. So these kind of things that develop in early years, which is what analysis is all about. Pope Pius said, give me a child of 6, he got it from Freud actually, but give me a child of 6 and I will have more of an influence on them than you will if you have them for the rest of their lives. So the foundation is laid very early, and the events that occur very early have a deep impression. And it's something like the foundation of a building. You can build a beautiful house, a beautiful building, but if the foundation has cracks, there's going to be a problem. And so you very often analysis, you not only deal with the present, but you also deal with the past. We speak of transference, which is a fundamental concept that Freud contributed, which is in analysis. And that means you carry over, you transfer from one person to another. If you have trouble with your father, you may have trouble with authority figures. If you have trouble with your mother, you may have trouble with women. Some misogynists develop that because of the nature of the poor nature of the relationship with their mother. So that the earlier years, analysis particularly goes back not only deal with the present, but the past and the early years, but only not just for the sake of going back, but to make the connection, to see where the transference is from the early part of their life, or the early people in their life, to later people, when it really, the connection is not necessarily valid. And so we speak of transference in a variety of ways along those lines, that people have that kind of connection. It can occur with people, it can occur with situations. I'll give you an idea. A man comes to see me, referred by a local primary doctor, and everything's fine. He discusses his life and his problems, and next makes an appointment, and he cancels it. So the primary doctor calls me, laughing hysterically. I said, what are you laughing at? He said, you know why he canceled? I said, no, I have no idea. He said, because you didn't wear a shirt and tie and have a suit on. He said his father always told him, you can't trust a man who doesn't wear a shirt, tie, and suit. So there was the imprint of what his father told him that was carried over and transferred to later life. I'm afraid he had a hard time finding an analyst with a shirt, tie, and jacket these days. But that was the nature of where that came from. You have many situations like that where there's this kind of a transference. Sometimes you can't accept the patient because of the transference. For example, a man came to see me and he had a couple of sessions and he said, I'm very uncomfortable. And I said, why? He says, you look like my father. said, well, we'll give it a little while, but if that's going to be buggy on it, transfer to somebody else, because it's too much of a hindrance, really up front, for him to be able to go anywhere when he's already starting out with that kind of a feeling. You know, and of course, the transference phenomena in analysis is something we always look for. Who do they see the analyst as being? Who does the analyst represent to them? Does he represent a father figure? Does he represent a mother? Does he represent somebody in their lives in some way or other that plays a role? Sometimes you can even be, in their minds, the good mother who's taking care of them, who's meeting their needs, who understands them. But the trouble with that is when that happens, they become too dependent. And you have to work on that. Analysis is a weaning process from the first day. It's to help a person be independent, not to be dependent, and not to be looking to the analyst as some kind of a caretaker or mother figure or father figure, but somebody who's going to help them stand on their own feet, be independent, and be secure. That's the object of analysis. When somebody is ready for discharge, the last few sessions are typically, understandably, very rocky. Why? Because they all of a sudden have to give up somebody that understood them, who supported them, and so on. And all of a sudden, every problem they have comes back for a couple of weeks until we realize it's a resistance to ending the analysis. And we set a date, and that date doesn't change, regardless of whatever happens, because it's the object of analysis to be able to be independent, stand your own 2 feet, and not to need anybody. You want to be able to be with people in a relationship, in a marriage. You want to be with people by choice, not by necessity. And the same way even with an analyst. You have to be there by choice and not by necessity. That's what we ultimately want to work out. All right, any further questions? Sure.
I got one right here.
I have
One
very
second,
weird.
1 second, wait.
Wait a minute, give you my point.
I can have a very, very disturbing dream, scary dream, and I can force myself to wake up. Is that
Okay.
unusual?
Not at all. You bring up an important point. You bring up dreams that are so-called nightmares. So let's talk about it for a moment. Nightmare is not, you said scary dream, which it may be, and you wake yourself up because you don't want to be dealing with whatever that is. The scary dream, by the way, again, is not what it seems. That is to say, whatever the scary dream is about is not the real fright or the real anxiety. The real anxiety is what's behind that dream. You have to look at what's in the dream and see what it might remind you of that is creating that kind of fear and that kind of anxiety. But nightmares are not necessarily bad dreams. People think nightmares, are frightening dreams. A nightmare could be the idea, as I said to you before, nature takes care of your thoughts and feelings by putting them into dreams and then scrambling it and you can understand what it is. If what it is that's on your mind is breaking through and it's coming out as to what the real meaning of what the dream is and what you're really thinking about, that could startle you and be like a nightmare. It's a breakthrough of what's really behind it. Insomnia. What's insomnia? Insomnia is exactly that. A person starts to fall asleep, they go into a dream. The dream is something they can't deal with or they can't face, so they wake up. And they go back to sleep, wake up again, and they can't sleep. Because there's something there that's troubling them that perhaps they don't know enough about or can't face or is disturbing. And that keeps them from sleeping. So that's really what nightmare is about. There are all kinds of other sleep disturbances. For example, somnambulism, sleepwalking. What's that about? Well, it's about the fact that it can extend, by the way, so far that the person leaves their house and leaves the area and becomes another person in another life with another name. That's how far I can go. But it's the fact that whatever they're dealing with, they can't tolerate, and so they have to split it off and think they're another person in another place. It's like the question of reincarnation. reincarnation was a case of what's called Mrs. Curran and Mrs. Piper. Mrs. Curran claimed that she was Mrs. Piper in the late 18th century. And she delineated the village that she lived in, the store, the people, everything. And nobody could figure it out. Well, the answer was, when she was very young, she sat on her great-grandfather's lap, who lived in that town, and gave her all that information. It was not reincarnation. There's no magical thinking that we have discovered that anybody's been able to prove with reincarnation, with telepathy, with anything of that sort. You know, there was like Duke, J.B. Ryan and Duke tried to prove a whole lot of things along those lines. ESP and so on was eventually disproven. So the American Psychological Association, American Psychiatric, has had big awards, 50,000, 100,000, anybody could prove it. Nobody ever was able to. Even in Amityville Horror, if you know about the Amityville Horror, if you know about that, there was things going across the table, flying across the room and flying across the table. And so they were talking about ghosts and this and that. It turned out that the Long Island Lighting Company had cables under that house, and the cables crossed in a certain way that caused the motion of metals in the house to move across the board and jump from here and there. There was no mystery. So the science eventually prevails. All right, anybody else? Back there.
If someone does not remember dreams, what is the objective evidence that we know, that makes us know that they're having 3 to 5 dreams, but just not remembering them?
Okay, good question. There was a man, it was a study of dreams, and there was a man who said, I never dream. So they used EEG, electroencephalograph, on his brain, on his mind, and whenever you are dreaming, whenever your mind is active, there are brain waves. So during the course of the night, they saw the brain waves, and he shook him and said, what are you dreaming? And he mumbled 3 or 4 different things. In the morning, they said to him, well, what was your dream? He said, I told you, I don't dream. And then he told them what he said. And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. I never said that. Well, of course he did. And that was the dream that he was having, but it was completely repressed. Now, needless to say, this was a man who was blocked and repressed. He was not a man given to, if there was a problem, forget it, move on. Not deal with it and not try to resolve it. And that was the nature of his dreams as well. Yes?
I have a question. I was just wondering if the drugs that so many of us take at this point in our lives have anything to do with the dreams that we have or don't have.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
The drugs that we take. You know, if you take drugs at night before you go to sleep, okay?
Take drugs.
Drugs, pharmaceuticals.
What? I didn't get the first word.
Do you take
Oh, drugs. Yeah.
drugs?
You want about them?
Yeah. So, do they have any influence on your dreams?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. You know, drugs in themselves can produce hallucinations, let alone dreams. So they will have an effect. But the effect, let's put it this way, the effect is usually an exaggeration of what's already there. We'll make it more acute. It won't create it. It will just bring it out and maybe make it more acute and maybe with more anxiety and more disturbance. That would be what the drug would cause. But it wouldn't itself create something new. Way back there.
Right here, I got one first. Go ahead,
What about,
Mr. Lapidus, go ahead.
Okay.
I have dreams about sex, and I will tell you, it's a dream.
Lois,
Good for you.
Lois, I didn't think he had it in him to say that.
You know, before we get to that, there were two analysts in their 90s, and they were experts on dreams and experts in sexuality. And so they were asked, do you still have sex? And said, of course, but now it's all mental.
It's all mental.
What about the person that dreams and says they remember everything, every dream,
Yeah.
to the minute details. Is that possible?
If what? No, I didn't get what you, if what?
A person that claims that they dream and remembers every dream and every detail.
Uh-huh. Well, you say, is it possible, Naomi? Yeah, it's possible, but I would suspect that there's a secondary elaboration. In other words, they're adding to it different things that are not in the dream.
I
Rather
do
than
that.
it's really a dream altogether. We call that secondary elaboration. Doris? Wait, we'll get a mic.
All I want to say,
Oh, not him again.
all I want to say, Dr. Pusar, is a gentleman who gave a feeling about his sex life that he must, of course, be speaking about himself. And that it does
All right,
not, and that it does not necessarily,
Give it to Doris. Let's see what you have to say.
does not necessarily travel throughout the
I don't know what you're
age
asking.
group. But I do have, I had one other question.
Oh, not you
When,
again.
when I was young, which was just a couple of days and nights ago,
You remember?
yes, I remembered, I forgot I remembered, but if it got around to a family that an individual was involved in psychiatry, not as a teacher, but as a user, that they were sick, they were really sick. And that today, we look at psychiatry as a big aid in helping us get through a rough time in life. Do you agree with that switchover? And
Well, of course.
what
Of
was
course.
the main reason? Is it monetary, or is it the fact that the industry, the profession,
Well, of course, things have changed and things have evolved, and it's not, people are not labeled if they go for therapy or go for analysis the way they used to, you know, you're crazy, you know, kind of idea. I'll tell you something interesting. A lot of the European analysts went to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And so in Buenos Aires, if you're not an analysis, you're looked down upon. You know, if you're worth anybody, if you're anybody and you're a worthwhile person, you better be an analysis.
Right.
So the question was whether you're an analysis in Argentina. But who are you an analysis with? There was a competition for who was with the best analyst. So there's a whole different thing.
the prettiest.
Somebody else?
Oh, no, I'm coming.
Were you in analysis, and what were the results of that?
The results of what?
Were you in analysis, and what was the result of that?
Florence is here, you better ask her. Yeah, well, you know, it's an interesting question because in the training of analysts, which is beyond the medical degree or the psychological degree. I'm sorry. Beyond the normal degrees, medical, psychological, beyond residency, analysis is a specialty beyond. You first go for analytic training after. And analytic training includes three parts. It includes a coursework, it includes supervision, you're giving cases and you're supervised, and it includes your own analysis. Now, in years past, the American Psychoanalytic and the International required you to go 5 times a week. And the average analysis lasted 7.3 years. Now, that's been modified. That was a little bit much. That was my day. And that was a little bit much. So they've cut back now. They made it 4 times a week. And sometimes recognized 3 times a week. But it is a long-term analysis. When you go through a training analysis, you have to really be working out your problems, otherwise you impose them on the person. And so I said, okay, Florence. Anybody else? Doris?
What should we dream about tonight?
We are enjoying you, Dr. Pusar.
Okay,
He's talking
I've
again.
developed another question. There was a program on TV, very well acted, where where the main actor was an individual like yourself. And it was extremely interesting, professionally done, and like each week he would have another patient in. And that program ran for quite some time. Unfortunately, maybe somebody here remembers it.
So what
Oh,
about
In Treatment.
What are you saying? What
It
about
was called In Treatment. And
Yeah, right. I remember.
have you, do you feel that, I thought, as a non-professional, of course, that it was well done. Did you have an opportunity?
I did
Can
see
you
it. I
recommend
didn't
it?
follow it, but I did see it. It was well done. You're absolutely
Well
right.
done.
But at the same time, TV is not real life. And of course, in order to be able to put something on TV, it's got to be abbreviated. So it looks like something is resolved in a much quicker time than the actual resolution in treatment. That's the difference. But otherwise, also there's some crazy stuff. You know, there are sometimes you get an involvement or you get a TV program where the therapist or analyst gets personally involved with the patient in one way or another. And sometimes they leave the office and go for walks and things like that. Well, we call that parameters. It's beyond the pale. And it's not usually what's done because it breaks what we call the frame. The frame is what analysis requires and what the relationship is. And once you break the frame, then you're dealing with some other problems that may come up. So that TV programs oftentimes will go beyond what real treatment is like. Anybody else? Over here. Sonny?
Here he comes.
This might be an unusual question. When I go to bed at night, I try not to think, but sometimes I'm thinking, and I'm wondering, and I seem to visualize, and I'm wondering, am I dreaming? And then I wake up, and I don't know if it's the thought or if it's the dream.
Good for you. That's a good question. It's called hypnagogic dreams. And what happens is, for example, you wake up in the morning and you say to your significant other, you know what I talked to you about last night? They say, you didn't talk to me about anything, you fell asleep. So it seems very real what you talked about, what you said, or what you felt, but it was a half asleep, half a dream. And it's called hypnagogic dreams. It's a half awake, half asleep dream.
Yeah, because I often wondered, was I dreaming or was I thinking?
Right.
Because I could visualize it
That's
right in front of me.
That's right.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, anybody else? You got one more. Okay, go ahead.
I had a dream that was so real that I made an important decision based on that. And later on, it turned out that someone told me, no, what I had dreamt was not real, but I had already made an important decision.
Well, there's no doubt, as I said, the mind never stops working. So the mind is working in the course of the night. Sometimes mathematicians will be working on some kind of formula, and they go to sleep and they wake up in the morning, they found the answer. Because in the course of the night, they've worked out the problem. So, you know, but be careful. Don't make decisions based on dreams.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pusar.
Give him a warm round of applause. I appreciate you doing this for the residents. And if anybody dreams of the 6 numbers for Saturday, please let me know.